Welcome, Ames Chamber of Commerce members. This is Drew Camp, Vice President with the Ames Chamber of Commerce, here to do another interview with our state legislators. We're happy to welcome today Representative Dave Dio, who represents Nevada and some parts of eastern and northern and southern Story County. Representative, thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
How can the state legislature assist in continuing to grow Iowa's population and attract and retain talent to address the state's critical workforce shortages, we especially here in Story County with 1.3% unemployment?
I just kind of continue on with some of the things we've already done with job training, with whether it's some of the things we did with Future Ready Iowa, those programs, continue to look at those apprenticeships, whether we need to maybe continue to even put more resources into apprenticeships. I think those have been great programs that we've done in recent years that we need to continue to make sure they're doing what we intended. And then one of the things we passed last year, I think that's already off to a good start, is the Last Dollar Scholarship Program that, as you know, provides scholarships for students that are close to graduating but don't quite have the money to quite get there. And so those are limited to fields that are in high demand, that are just looking for individuals.
And then the Employer Innovation Fund too obviously provides some assistance directly to the employers as part of that Future Ready Iowa package too, and that's something we were really supportive of and we were happy to see get done. Here with Representative Beth Wessel-Krischel, who largely represents the southern part of Ames in her district. How can the state legislature assist in continuing to grow Iowa's population and attract and retain talent to address the state's critical workforce shortages, we especially here in Story County with 1.3% unemployment?
Right. I'm going to go back to education. One of the reasons I saw that a lot of people are leaving the state or not moving into the state is their concern that we're not making the investment in education. And so I would go for education. I think you can also, look at, we have student loans listed here as one of the problems. Well, we don't have any need-based grants for students in Iowa. We're one of only 2 states that does not offer that. I think we can do a lot more by investing in young people.
And today I'm fortunate enough to have the longest tenured Senate Republican in the state of Iowa here to interview with us today, Senate President Pro Tem, Senator Jerry Baines. Senator, thanks for being with us here today.
It's my pleasure, Drew. I look forward to coming and talking to you.
And kind of along the lines of workforce and attracting people to come here and stay here, how can the legislature specifically, and potentially even the executive branch too, obviously working hand in hand, help work to grow Iowa's population and attract and retain talent to make people want to stay here and address those workforce shortages?
Well, I think we're already kind of covered that. That's part of what we're talking about when we're talking about the skills that they can to create the jobs, and that's how you're going to grow the population, is you're going to encourage workers to come to this state. And if they have a good job, to me, that's the part that the legislature needs to work on, as far as being sure that we have the schools necessary, the training necessary, the opportunity for those individuals to increase their skills in the workforce. As far as local ideas, if you want to talk about bike trails or if you want to talk about amenities, I think that is more of a local area situation than it is a state situation. We can have the state parks, we can have some of those, but a lot of the individual trails and a lot of the individual things that people are coming to look for, those were taken care of with local initiatives. They were combinations of a private, public,
city
partnership,
and county.
Some of them, exactly. Some of them weren't even just they might be a specific business. They might have been a business in conjunction with a city, in conjunction with a county, and then they might have even gotten some state funds. So those are all things that I think are more locally, and I think better locally addressed than to have the legislature try to wade in and say, well, we want to have this many of this and this. I don't think that kind of a formula fits on a statewide. I think that's more of a local basis. And so we just want to be sure that the tools are available as much as they are to help out.
We now welcome Senator Annette Sweeney, who represents northern Story County, eastern Story County, and all the way over towards Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Dike, New Hartford. Senator, thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, you bet. This is always a fun time to get to be able to visit and also to hear input from other individuals about what we've got going on.
And one issue that we really look at, it's our top priority as you look at our legislative priorities, is talent. And what that really means is workforce availability and workforce development. And one of the things we look at, we just had Debbie Durham in town and she talked about population growth. So what are some things that you think the legislature can do working with the executive branch to grow Iowa's population and kind of attract and retain the talent we need to fill our workforce gaps?
I'm very excited for what the governor has and also Debbie Durham has going is with Renew Rural Iowa, Empower Rural Iowa, and we also have the Rural Iowa Task Force that we have also that's out there, and they're going town to town to visit with individuals because you just can't sit in that ivory tower and figure out what needs to be done. You need to go out to the grassroots and ask. Grundy Center is a really good example that I have for attracting individuals to remain in our small towns. They've done a downtown revitalization, and they have put apartments up above some of the businesses, and it is just amazing what they have done. Nevada had some ribbon cutting this summer on innovations that they have done, and I've also talked to their individuals that I would love to take them up to Grundy Center to show them what that's been happening. So people want to see something happening within the towns in order for them to come into the town, to want to be a part of that community. I think we also have a real revitalization of younger people wanting that little smaller town home feel, with their families. They want to be able to walk down the street, go to the park, let the kids be on the swings and have a good time, or even in the evenings when they have concerts. And our small towns, have Winterfest, they have Strawberry Fest, and all these different kinds of things they have in our small towns, which I think is really helping to revitalize our downtowns.
And one thing we'll get on to, a topic we'll get to here a little bit later too, is broadband is actually really good in a lot of those small towns. Some of the best service a lot of the times is the rural telecommunications companies.
Yes.
And we'll touch on that a little later. Very grateful today to be with Representative Ross Woburn. He represents part of North Ames in the seat previously held by Representative Heddens, now Supervisor Heddens. Representative Woburn, thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you, and thanks to the viewers out there. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to chamber members.
A lot of the times, as you can imagine, with what we do, it all relates back a lot to the number one issue that we're seeing not only here in Ames and Story County, but throughout the state of workforce development and workforce shortages. So that leads us into our next question of how can the state legislature assist in continuing to grow Iowa's population and attract and retain talent to address the state's workforce shortages?
Housing is a big challenge, as well as issues with student loans. I think it's important to try and not look at issues in isolation, especially when we're talking about some of our millennials and younger folks coming into the workforce, or folks who are getting trained to get skills that they can get a higher paying job. But looking at some of those barriers in the workforce, we've got a low unemployment rate here, but several people are working multiple jobs, but they don't necessarily have the skills to get a higher paying job, and that's certainly something that we want to promote in the workforce. But when I talk about looking at issues that kind of cut across or impact folks in their life, if we're looking at younger workers especially, housing is a factor, which also relates to childcare if they're looking at perhaps starting a young family, but it's also connected to wages and transportation. If I have to, if I'm not making a high enough wage and I've got to travel to my job, but also a different direction for childcare, can I afford that childcare? It's all linked and intermingled there, which I think back to the first question.
Oh, yeah.
How many of us, I understand in politics, it's what one issue is, or that top issue, but how many of us in life are fortunate enough that we only have to address one issue at a time? And I would say that's very rare. So we really need to be looking at ways that we can cut across different areas that affect folks that we're trying to attract here and retain here for the workforce, but also is there an action we can take that cuts across multiple levels? I referred to mental health care. Again, that affects education. It affects employers, employees, families, and both rural and urban. Farmers, young African Americans and farmers are having an increase in suicide rates. So it really is something that we can't avoid much longer without. Some would say that we're really behind the boat in terms of trying to have an impact to reduce negative consequences of problems with mental health care and availability and accessibility that we have here.
And we kind of touched on a few issues I want to touch on real quick too before we move to the next question, and that was housing. One of the biggest things with Empower Rural Iowa last year, and when that was passed, that was one of the priority issues of the governor's administration, and we were supportive of that. But there were some broadband components in there. But workforce housing tax credits was also a really big piece of that. They paid off the backlog for the rural areas, but one thing to keep in mind too is there's still very much one for the urban areas. And the problem with that is they made it competitive merit-based, which it needed to be originally. They had a queue system originally that backlogged badly, hence the need to pay off that backlog. But that's one of those things we want to look at because we think that workforce housing tax credit could be really of impact. It's been impactful to places like Dubuque and Fort Dodge and several other communities, but we really want to make sure that's available throughout the state. So that's one thing for housing. And then childcare, actually, at the Iowa Chamber Alliance event on Wednesday morning, Minority Leader Peterson and then Senate President Schneider, they were both talking on a little bit different scope, but about childcare. And Senator Schneider specifically mentioned the childcare cliff being one thing they really wanted to make sure they focused on. And I know Senator Peterson really that was a big focus of hers too, because as someone who will be looking for childcare here in the very near future, I can attest to the fact how expensive it is.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Well, and I mean, my youngest is 25, and it's the reason I mention that is because it's important for those of us who are not soon to have children or looking to start families or if our children are in school right now. It impacts us because I've got staff members who with my job at Iowa State Extension who have children or having children, and so to be able to both afford to live as well as have child care. And if your child gets sick when they're in child care, the further you have to travel to show up to help them out there, it really does kind of tear at the shreds of daily life if we're not addressing those things.
And those are some big issues that we really do look forward to talking about this session. Thank you, Ames Chamber of Commerce members, for watching. Please do come back and listen to the next audio interviews with our next few questions for our state legislators next week.